They flooded my workshop, so I shut off the water to their country club. That sounds petty when you say it quickly like that. But nothing about it felt petty when I was standing ankle-deep in brown water, watching 10 years of my life rust in real time. And the worst part wasn't even the damage. It was the way they acted like it didn't matter. I lived just outside a gated community called Briar Glen Estates, about 40 minutes north of Charlotte. Big stone entrance, perfectly trimmed hedges, and a golf course that wraps around the neighborhood like a green ribbon. I don't live inside those gates. My place has been in my family since the 70s, long before developers showed up with blueprints and promises. My dad built the workshop himself. A simple cedar structure with a tin roof and wide double doors that open out toward the pasture. That building is where I learned how to square a board, sharpen a chisel, and fix things other people would throw away. A few months ago, I walked out there early one morning and caught a smell. Wet wood, sour and heavy. At first, I figured maybe I'd left a window cracked and we'd gotten one of those sideways summer storms. It happens. But when I opened the door, the bottom dragged against something. I pushed harder, stepped inside, and my boot sank. Water. Not a puddle. Not a small leak. Full-on standing water, covering the entire floor. I just stood there for a moment, listening. That quiet lapping sound against metal legs and storage bins. My table saw was half submerged. The cast iron already blooming with orange rust. My hand planes were floating in a plastic tote that had tipped over. Lumber I'd been curing for a custom dining table was warped and swollen, like it had given up. You ever have one of those moments where your brain refuses to catch up with what your eyes are seeing? That was me. I kept thinking, this isn't real, this is a mistake, this is something small. But the longer I stood there, the heavier it settled in my chest. This wasn't small. It took me 2 days just to pump the water out. My neighbor Walt came over with a sump pump and a 6-pack. Didn't say much, just shook his head. When the floor finally dried enough to walk on without leaving prints, the damage was clear. Thousands of dollars in tools. Months of work gone. At first, I blamed bad luck. Maybe a pipe had burst underground. Maybe the creek behind my property had overflowed. So I started walking the perimeter, following the slope of the land. That's when I saw it. A ditch, freshly cut, the soil still loose and red. It ran from the stormwater culvert behind Briar Glen's 12th fairway, straight down the incline, and emptied neatly into the low spot behind my shop. I crouched down and touched the dirt. Still soft. This wasn't erosion. This was intentional. Now, I'm not the conspiracy type. I build cabinets, not cases. But something about the angle of that trench, the way it lined up like an arrow pointed straight at my building, made my stomach twist. So I made a few calls. County office first, then the water management department, then a guy I know who does grading work around town. What I pieced together over the next week made everything feel a lot less accidental. Briar Glen had been dealing with drainage issues on the back nine. Heavy rains were pooling near the greens, slowing play, costing them tee times. So the HOA board approved what they called a runoff optimization project. Sounds clean, doesn't it? What it actually meant was they redirected excess stormwater toward the lowest adjacent property, mine. I called the HOA president, a man named Russell Davenport, retired banker, always in press polos, even on weekends. We'd spoken maybe twice before, both times polite enough. Russell, I said, try and keep my voice steady. Did your board approve a drainage change that directs water onto my land? There was a pause, papers shuffling. It's within community guidelines. I'm not part of your community. Another pause, shorter this time. It's stormwater, Nathan. Natural runoff. You'll be fine. I looked out at my workshop while he said that. The warped beams, the rusted saw, my dad's old lathe sitting there like it had aged 10 years overnight. It cost me everything in that building, I said. He sighed like I'd inconvenienced him. With all due respect, your structure sits at a lower elevation. Water flows downhill. That's not our fault. Now here's the thing. Water does flow downhill, but trenches don't dig themselves. I hung up before I said something I couldn't take back. For a couple days, I paced around like a dog that couldn't find the fence line. Angry, yeah, but also embarrassed. Like, Somehow I should have seen this coming. That's when something clicked in the back of my mind. The pond. There's a pond that sits right along the property line between my land and Briar Glen's course. It's been there longer than either of us. My dad used to fish it with me on Sunday mornings. When the developers first bought the adjacent acreage decades ago, they asked if they could draw irrigation water from it. Back then, it was just a handshake deal. My dad was a trusting type. No paperwork, just neighborly goodwill. Over the years, Briar Glen expanded. Their sprinkler systems got more complex. They built a small pump house near the water's edge. I never thought much about it. Figured it was mutually beneficial. They kept the pond level stable. We all enjoyed the view. But standing there, staring at my flooded shop, I started wondering something I probably should have asked a long time ago. Did they actually have any legal right to that water? That night, I pulled out the old property surveys my dad kept in a metal filing cabinet, spread them across the kitchen table, traced boundary lines with my finger. According to map, about 70% of that pond sat on my land. And the pump house? That sat entirely on my side. I didn't sleep much. Around midnight, I was online reading about easements and water rights, coffee going cold beside me. By 2 a.m, I knew enough to feel dangerous. By the end of that week, the county records office confirmed it. There was no recorded easement, no formal agreement, just a decades-old understanding between two men who shook hands instead of hiring lawyers. And one of those men was gone. I drove out to the pond the next morning and stood in front of that little pump house. Beige paint peeling, a faint hum from inside where water was being pulled like it had been for years. I ran my hand along the metal door and felt something settle in my chest. Not rage, something colder, clearer. If water flows downhill, I thought, then so does leverage.